Twin mother claims to speak 9 languages. Her boss laughed but was shocked soon after. Jessica Miller felt her hands tremble as she adjusted the 2 babies in her arms, trying to hide the nervousness coursing through her body. The interview for the secretary position was her last hope before the eviction scheduled for the following week. It was when she mentioned her knowledge of 9 languages that laughter erupted through the meeting room at Thompson Construction and Partners. Richard Thompson, the company's owner, doubled over laughing, pointing his finger straight at her. A single mother with 2 babies who can barely afford her own clothes claims to speak 9 languages, he said between chuckles. What a joke. Next thing you'll tell me you have a PhD from Harvard too. Jessica's face burned with shame. The twins, Matthew and Mark, just 6 months old, began crying in her arms as if sensing the tension in the air. She tried to soothe them, rocking them gently, but her own tears threatened to spill. Mr. Richard, I know it might sound strange, but I really... Prove it then, he interrupted, still laughing. Say something in Chinese since you're so smart. Desperation gripped Jessica. With the babies crying louder, she attempted to speak a few words in Mandarin, but her nerves made her stumble. The words came out jumbled, without fluency, as if all her confidence had evaporated in that moment. Exactly what I thought, Richard scoffed, crossing his arms. Another liar trying to get a job with fake qualifications. Please, Mr. Richard, Jessica begged, struggling to stand while holding both babies. I really need this job. I'm being evicted next week. My children have nowhere to go. Richard looked her up and down, as if appraising a broken object. The room fell silent, only the baby's cries echoing off the walls. You know what? He finally said. I'll give you a chance, but not as a secretary. You'll work here for a month unpaid, proving you're worth something. If you impress me, maybe I'll consider hiring you for real. Unpaid? Jessica asked, stunned. Take it or leave it. Humiliation burned like fire in her chest, but reality was even harsher. With no options left, she swallowed her pride and agreed. The next day, she discovered her real role, office janitor. Karen Wilson, the head secretary, greeted her with a fake smile that didn't reach her eyes. A woman in her 40s, always impeccably dressed, she seemed born into that world of power. So you're the new intern? Karen asked, emphasizing the last word with disdain. Yes, my name is Jessica. Well, Jessica, I hope you didn't come here thinking you'd handle important documents. Your job is to clean bathrooms and empty trash cans. The cleaning supplies are in that closet. Jessica swallowed hard. She had graduated with a degree in literature, specializing in translation, and had even worked with diplomatic documents in the past. But now she stood there, holding a bucket and a mop. The first days were pure torture. Karen seized every opportunity to humiliate her, spilling coffee on the freshly mopped floor or tossing crumpled papers right in front of her. Oops, how careless of me, Karen would say with a cruel smile. You'll have to clean that again. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers a lot. Now, continuing. During the nights, Jessica cleaned the empty offices, always carrying the twins in a double stroller she had borrowed. It was during these lonely hours that she could think clearly, away from judgmental stares and constant humiliation. It was on one of these nights that she found a set of documents scattered on Richard's desk. They were contracts in Russian, full of technical terms and complex clauses. Even though she knew she shouldn't touch important papers, something caught her attention. There were serious translation errors, terms that completely changed the meaning of the contracts, figures that were being misinterpreted. Without thinking too much, she grabbed a pen and began making notes in the margins, correcting the inaccurate translations. The next morning, Richard found the documents with the corrections. His fury was immediate. "Who touched my documents?" he shouted, making the entire office stop and stare. Jessica was vacuuming the reception area when she heard the yelling. Her heart raced. She knew she was in trouble, but she couldn't regret making the corrections. "It was you, wasn't it? Richard appeared in the reception area, holding the papers in his hands. "I told you not to touch important documents." "Mr. Richard, I can explain." "You'll explain it to my lawyer. I'm suing you for breach of confidentiality." That's when the phone rang. It was Alexei Sokolov, the international consultant handling the negotiation with the Russian company. Richard answered, still furious, speaking loudly so everyone could hear how Jessica had ruined everything. "Alexei, that cleaning woman messed with your documents and—" "Richard, my friend." Alexei's voice sounded relieved on the other end. "Those corrections saved our deal. There were terrible errors in the original translation. If we'd signed it like that, we would have lost millions. Whoever made those corrections knows legal Russian very well." The office fell completely silent. Richard looked at Jessica with an expression of surprise and confusion. "How did you know?" he began to ask, but was interrupted by Karen. "Richard, honey, obviously she just got lucky," Karen said, stepping closer and placing a possessive hand on his arm. "Anyone can use an online translator these days." Jessica realized in that moment that Karen and Richard had something beyond a professional relationship. The intimacy between them was obvious, and Karen clearly felt threatened by any woman who might catch his attention, even if it was just a cleaner. "Prove it then," Richard said, still skeptical. "Say something in Arabic." This time, without the pressure of crying babies and with renewed confidence, Jessica responded fluently in classical Arabic, reciting a piece of poetry she had memorized years ago. Her fluency was perfect, with impeccable pronunciation. Richard was stunned, but his pride wouldn't let him admit his mistake publicly. "Well, that still doesn't prove anything," he muttered. "She could have memorized a few phrases." Karen smiled smugly, as if she'd won a battle. But Jessica knew she had planted a seed of doubt in Richard's mind. In the days that followed, things got even worse. Karen spread rumors that Jessica had falsified her resume and had probably stolen the language information from somewhere. The other employees began treating her with even more hostility. "Watch your belongings," she heard one of the accountants whisper to another. "That one's too clever to be honest." Jessica felt the weight of suspicious stares wherever she went. Her things started disappearing. The soap she brought from home, the snacks she left in the break room fridge, even diapers for the babies. She knew someone was sabotaging her, but she couldn't prove anything. One afternoon, an important Japanese client arrived for a last-minute meeting. The company was trying to close an equipment import contract, but no one could communicate properly. The translator they had hired didn't show up, and Richard was desperate. Jessica was cleaning the bathroom near the meeting room when she heard the commotion. Through the slightly open door, she saw Richard gesturing frantically, trying to communicate with hand signals, while the Japanese client grew increasingly impatient. She hesitated for a moment. She knew interfering could cause even more problems, but she also saw an opportunity to prove her real worth. She knocked lightly on the door and entered. "Excuse me, Mr. Richard. Can I help?" "Get out of here, Jessica. Can't you see we're in an important meeting?" But she went straight to the Japanese client and greeted him in formal Japanese, explaining she was there to help with translation. The relief on the man's face was immediate. For the next 2 hours, Jessica flawlessly translated the entire negotiation. Not only did she know the language, but she also understood the technical terms and cultural nuances that made a difference in the business world. The contract was signed, securing millions in profits for the company. Richard stayed silent, watching Jessica work with a competence he had never imagined. When the Japanese client said goodbye, he specifically praised Jessica, saying he rarely encountered such a skilled translator outside of Japan. "Richard-san," the client said, "you're lucky to have such a talented employee. She understands not just the words, but the heart of our culture." After he left, Richard remained quiet for several minutes, clearly wrestling with himself. "Starting Monday, you'll work as a translator," he finally said, avoiding her gaze, "but still at minimum wage. You're still on probation." Karen watched everything with barely disguised hatred. Jessica knew she had won a battle, but the war was far from over. That weekend, Jessica used her last savings to buy more appropriate clothes for working as a translator. She knew appearances mattered in that environment, and she wanted to be ready for the new challenges. Monday arrived with a new routine. Jessica got a small desk in the corner of the office, far from Karen's main desk, but finally working with what she did best. The first tasks were small, emails in English, business letters in Spanish. But soon Richard realized she truly mastered multiple languages and began assigning more complex work. That was when Barbara Johnson, an older employee from the finance department, approached her during lunch break. "Jessica, can I talk to you for a minute?" "Of course, Ms. Barbara. I've worked here for 15 years and seen many people come through this company. You seem familiar. Aren't you that young woman who was in the newspaper a few years ago? The language prodigy accepted into several universities." Jessica's heart raced. She had worked so hard to forget that part of her life that she barely remembered being in the news. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm almost sure it's you. I'll look for the article at home. If it really is you, Richard needs to know who he actually hired." That night, Jessica barely slept. The memories she had tried to bury came rushing back. She really had been a prodigy. At 15, she had been accepted into prestigious universities, impressing professors and linguists. The future had seemed bright and full of possibilities. But then everything changed. Her parents were in a car accident. It wasn't anything too serious, but her father developed spinal problems that prevented him from working, and her mother fell into severe depression. As an only child, Jessica dropped out of school to care for her family. For years, she worked odd jobs to support everyone while tending to her parents at home. Her language skills helped her land some freelance translation work, but nothing stable. By the time she finally stabilized things at home, it was too late to resume her studies with the same intensity. She managed to earn her degree in literature, but life had taken other turns. Later, she met Michael, the twins' father. He seemed like a good man, talking about marriage and a future together. But when he found out she was pregnant with twins, he vanished without a trace. The pregnancy was difficult, and Jessica spent all her savings on doctors and baby preparations. When Matthew and Mark were born, she was financially and emotionally drained. The next morning, Barbara showed up with a yellowed copy of a 7-year-old newspaper. The headline read, "17-year-old stuns linguists by mastering 8 languages." "That's really you!" Barbara exclaimed. Jessica Miller, Chicago's prodigy. The news spread through the office like wildfire. Some employees were impressed, others skeptical. Karen, of course, made sure to sow doubts. "Newspapers always exaggerate," she said loudly for all to hear. Besides, that was a long time ago. She's probably forgotten half of what she knew. Richard, on the other hand, was visibly unsettled. He began questioning how he'd misjudged someone so badly, but his pride still kept him from admitting the mistake publicly. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers a lot. Now continuing. Tension in the office grew as Richard started assigning Jessica more important tasks. Karen noticed she was losing ground and decided to take drastic action. She began spreading rumors that Jessica was seducing Richard for promotions. She whispered to other employees that a desperate single mother would do anything to get ahead. "Have you seen how she dresses now?" Karen remarked slyly. "And those looks she gives Richard very suspicious." The comments reached Jessica's ears, leaving her devastated. She'd worked so hard to earn professional respect, and now she was being accused of using underhanded methods. Things came to a head when Karen openly suggested in a staff meeting that Jessica might be using confidential information for personal gain. "She handles important documents, has access to sensitive data," Karen said with a dramatic pause. "How do we know she's not leaking information to competitors?" "Karen, that's a serious accusation," Richard said, clearly uncomfortable. "Just a legitimate concern. After all, we don't really know her past, do we?" Jessica felt like she'd been punched in the gut. She stood up, trembling with anger and humiliation. "I would never do something like that," she said, her voice breaking. "All I want is to work honestly to support my children." "Of course you'd say that," Karen replied with a cold smile. Richard watched silently, torn between siding with his mistress or supporting the employee who'd saved his company multiple times. That night, Jessica cried as the twins slept. She was tired of fighting. tired of constantly having to prove her worth. For a moment, she considered quitting and finding another job, but by morning, her determination had returned. She wasn't going to let Karen destroy her. If they wanted war, they'd get war. The opportunity came when Richard received an urgent call from Indian clients. There was a serious issue with a contract, and the Indian company was threatening to cancel the entire partnership. The problem was communication. No one could quite understand what was wrong. Richard was desperate. The Indian company represented nearly 20% of his annual revenue. Losing this client would be devastating. "I need someone who speaks Hindi," he said, pacing nervously around the room. "Where am I going to find someone who speaks Hindi in Chicago?" Jessica took a deep breath before speaking. "I speak Hindi, Mr. Richard." Everyone in the room turned to look at her. Karen laughed loudly. "Of course you do," she said sarcastically. "Next thing you'll say you speak Martian too." "Hindi is my 9th language," Jessica continued, ignoring Karen. "I learned it when I worked with consular documents a few years ago." Richard stared at her for a long moment, clearly wrestling with disbelief and desperation. "If you're lying, I'm not lying." The call with the Indian clients was connected. For 2 hours, Jessica translated simultaneously between Portuguese, English, and Hindi, mediating a complex discussion about technical specifications and contract terms. Not only did she resolve the misunderstanding, but she also negotiated even better terms for Richard's company. The Indian clients were so impressed by her fluency that they praised Richard for having such a competent employee. When the call ended, the office was completely silent. Richard looked at Jessica as if seeing her for the first time. "How?" he began, but couldn't finish the question. "Mr. Richard," Jessica said calmly, "I've tried to explain from day one who I really am. You chose not to believe me." Karen was visibly shaken, but tried to keep her composure. "Anyone can learn a few Hindi phrases online," she muttered, but her voice no longer sounded convincing. Richard quietly increased Jessica's salary by the end of that week, but he still refused to publicly acknowledge his mistake. Officially, she remained an assistant translator, a title that didn't remotely reflect her importance to the company. The real change began when Jessica discovered something that would change everything. During a weekend cleaning session, which she still did occasionally, she found documents left in the printer. They were printed emails between Karen and someone named Jay Reynolds, discussing suspicious bank transfers. Jessica didn't want to pry, but some terms in German caught her attention. They referenced offshore accounts and transfers that clearly violated company policy. She took photos of the documents with her phone and spent days analyzing every detail. Her fluency in German revealed a complex embezzlement scheme. Karen had been stealing from the company for months, using her privileged position to transfer money to personal accounts. Jessica faced a terrible dilemma. If she reported Karen, it might look like personal revenge. But if she didn't, she'd be complicit in theft. The decision became even harder when Matthew and Mark fell ill with pneumonia. Treatment was expensive, and even with her raise, Jessica didn't have enough money for the best doctors. That's when Karen approached her. "I heard your babies are sick," Karen said with false sympathy. "It must be so hard for a single mother to afford medical treatment." "I'll manage," Jessica replied curtly. "You know, I have some connections at private hospitals. I could get you a discount on treatment if you help me with one small thing." Jessica knew exactly what Karen was implying. If she pretended she hadn't seen anything about the embezzlement, Karen would help with the medical expenses. "No, thank you," Jessica said firmly. "Think about it," Karen insisted. "Your children need the best treatment, I can guarantee that. All you need to do is focus on your work and forget any documents you might have accidentally seen." It was a tempting offer. Jessica looked at the twins sleeping in their makeshift cribs in the corner of the office. They coughed softly and her heart ached, but she knew accepting that offer would be like selling her soul. "My answer is no." Karen smiled coldly. "You'll regret this decision." In the following weeks, Karen intensified her sabotage campaign. Important documents Jessica translated mysteriously disappeared. Emails she sent were accidentally deleted. Clients complained about not receiving information Jessica swore she had sent. Richard began questioning Jessica's competence, just as Karen wanted. "Jessica, where's the German contract translation?" he asked one morning, clearly annoyed. "I handed it in yesterday afternoon, Mr. Richard. I left it on Karen's desk for her to send to the client." "Karen, did you see this translation?" "I didn't receive any translation." Karen lied shamelessly. "I'm sure Jessica is confused. Maybe the stress of caring for sick babies is affecting her memory." Jessica felt anger boiling inside her, but she knew she couldn't prove anything at that moment. The situation reached a breaking point when a crucial meeting with German investors was scheduled. It was Richard's chance to expand internationally, but he needed someone who could translate simultaneously and handle the cultural nuances of the negotiation. On the morning of the meeting, Karen announced she had hired a professional translator. "I thought it best to ensure there were no communication issues," she said, looking straight at Jessica. The translator arrived, but it quickly became clear he only knew basic German, far from enough for a complex negotiation. The investors grew frustrated with the poor communication and began showing impatience. Richard was sweating bullets, watching millions of dollars slip through his fingers. That's when Jessica made a decision that would change everything. She stood up from the table where she had been observing and approached the German investors. She greeted them in perfect German, explained there had been a misunderstanding, and offered to continue the translation. For the next 3 hours, Jessica not only translated flawlessly, but also demonstrated deep knowledge of international business, technical construction terms, and even cultural aspects that smoothed the negotiation. The investors were so impressed, they praised Richard for the exceptional quality of his team. One of them said they rarely encountered such a competent professional outside Germany. The contract was signed, securing the company's international expansion. When the Germans left, Richard stood in the middle of the room, staring at Jessica as if she were a miracle. "How much do you want?" he asked abruptly. "What do you mean?" "Your salary. How much do you want to make? Name the amount." Jessica took a deep breath. This was her chance to finally be properly valued. "I want a stake in the company," she said calmly. Karen nearly choked on her coffee. "A stake?" Richard repeated, incredulous. "You just closed the biggest contract in your company's history because of my skills. How many millions is this contract worth? How many millions have I already brought to this company since I got here?" Richard fell silent, clearly doing the math in his head. "I want 20% ownership," Jessica continued. "And I want to be officially recognized as Director of International Relations." "Jessica, you're being a bit too ambitious," Karen interjected, though her voice trembled. "I'm being fair," Jessica replied. "For months I've been humiliated, disrespected, and underestimated. I've saved this company multiple times and was always treated like it was a favor to let me work here." Richard paced back and forth, visibly disturbed. "I need to think about this." "Of course," Jessica said. "But while you think, I have an interesting offer from Harrison Construction. They found out I handled the translation for the Germans and want to hire me as Director of International Expansion. The salary is 10 times what I make here." It was a lie, but Richard didn't know that. The thought of losing Jessica to a competitor clearly terrified him. 10 times, he repeated. "Plus full benefits for me and my kids, corporate daycare, premium health insurance." Richard ran a hand through his hair, clearly stressed. "Fine," he finally said, "but not 20%. I can offer 10%. 15%, Jessica countered. "Deal." Karen watched everything with growing horror. Her privileged position was crumbling before her eyes. But Jessica wasn't done yet. "There's one more thing," she said, pulling out her phone. "I need to show you something." She opened the photos of the documents she'd found, revealing evidence of Karen's embezzlement. "What is this?" Richard asked, taking the phone for a closer look. "Proof that someone in this company has been stealing money for months." Richard silently examined the photos, his expression darkening. When he looked up, he stared directly at Karen. "Can you explain these emails, Karen?" This must be a misunderstanding," Karen stammered. "These could be fake, edited photos. The emails are on the company server," Jessica said calmly. I can show you exactly where to find them." The color drained from Karen's face. She knew she'd been caught. "Richard, you know our history," she pleaded. "We've been together for years. Are you really going to believe this outsider?" "I'll believe the evidence," Richard replied coldly. "Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out." Now continuing, Karen was fired on the spot. The investigation revealed she'd embezzled nearly $500,000 over 2 years. Richard was shocked not just by the theft, but by his own blindness to Karen's manipulations. In the days that followed, the office atmosphere changed completely. Jessica was officially named Director of International Relations, given her own office, and for the first time since arriving, she felt professionally respected. But the most significant change came during a company-wide meeting. Richard stood and asked for everyone's attention. "I'd like to make a public announcement," he said, looking directly at Jessica. "When Jessica first came here, I judged her by the worst possible biases. I saw a single mother struggling financially and assumed she was incompetent. I was deeply wrong." The office fell completely silent. "Jessica is one of the most qualified people I've ever met. She's saved this company multiple times, brought in millions in contracts, and did all of it while being constantly disrespected and humiliated." Jessica felt tears forming in her eyes. "I want to publicly apologize," Richard continued, "not just for my own prejudices, but for allowing this culture of disrespect to exist in my company. Starting today, that changes." He turned to Jessica. "Will you accept my apology?" Jessica rose slowly. "I accept," she said, "but I want these apologies to turn into real changes." "What kind of changes?" "I want to create a language training program for all employees," she said. "I want this company to become a place where talent is recognized regardless of appearance or personal situation. And I want to establish an on-site daycare, so other working mothers don't go through the hardships I faced." Richard smiled for the first time since she'd met him. "Consider it approved." In the following months, Thompson and Partners was completely transformed. The language program Jessica created drastically increased the company's ability to serve international clients. The corporate daycare became a model for other businesses in the region. Jessica established a scholarship fund for talented young mothers, funded with part of her profits, as a partner in the company. She never forgot where she came from and made it her mission to help other women avoid what she had endured. Richard changed profoundly. He became a public advocate for inclusive policies in the business world, speaking at conferences about how biases can make companies lose exceptional talent. A year later, during the company's anniversary celebration, Richard made another special announcement. "Today I want to share something few people know," he told the audience of employees and clients. "A year ago, when I met Jessica, I made the most embarrassing mistake of my career. Not only did I underestimate her, but I publicly humiliated her." Jessica smiled, holding Matthew and Mark, who were now toddling and babbling words in English and Portuguese. "Jessica recorded that first meeting," Richard continued, causing murmurs in the crowd. "She had every right to sue me, to expose my ignorance publicly, but instead she proposed something revolutionary. He showed the audience the trailer for a documentary they were producing together about bias in the corporate world. This documentary will show how prejudices can destroy not just individual careers, but entire companies," Richard explained. "And it will show how change is possible, how we can grow and become better." The documentary Beyond First Impressions was released 6 months later and became an international reference for corporate diversity programs. Business schools began using it as required course material. Jessica became a sought-after speaker, sharing her story at conferences worldwide. But she always made sure to return to Chicago, to the company that was now her professional home. During one of these talks at the University of Chicago, a young student raised her hand during the Q&A. "Professor Jessica, how did you find the strength not to give up when everything seemed lost?" Jessica looked at the audience, seeing young faces full of hope and determination. "I found strength because I knew giving up would mean accepting that the biases were right," she answered. "It would mean telling my children they should settle for less than they deserve, simply because of how others see them." She paused, remembering those difficult early days. But most of all, I found strength because I realized our greatest victory isn't just proving others wrong about us. It's helping create a world where others don't have to go through what we did. 5 years later, Matthew and Mark began attending the bilingual school Jessica had founded, using part of the company's profits. They grew up in an environment where diversity and respect were fundamental values. Richard, now a recognized advocate for inclusive policies, often said in his lectures that meeting Jessica had been the most valuable humiliation of his life. Thompson & Partners became the first American construction company to win an International Corporate Diversity Award. The on-site daycare served not only employees, but also families from the local community. One Friday afternoon, Jessica was in her office reviewing contracts in Mandarin when Barbara, now promoted to financial manager, knocked on the door. "Jessica, there's a young woman at reception asking to see you. She says she's a single mother and needs work." Jessica smiled, remembering herself 5 years earlier. "Send her in." The young woman entered nervously, carrying a baby in her arms. Her clothes were simple, but she tried to stand tall despite her obvious unease. "My name is Amanda," she said. "I heard about you during a lecture at college. I graduated with a degree in engineering, but I can't find a job anywhere. Everyone sees the baby and assumes you're not competent," Jessica finished, understanding perfectly. "Exactly. Could you maybe give me a chance?" Jessica looked at Amanda and saw herself years ago. The difference was that now she had the power to make a difference. "Tell me about your qualifications," she said, gesturing for Amanda to sit. Over the next hour, Jessica learned that Amanda had graduated with honors, spoke English and Spanish fluently, and had innovative ideas about sustainability in construction. "Amanda," Jessica finally said, "when can you start?" The young woman's eyes filled with tears. "You're offering me a job." "I'm offering an opportunity. The rest is up to you." Amanda started as an assistant, but within months she was leading sustainable construction projects. Her creativity and technical knowledge impressed clients and colleagues alike. Richard watched it all with pride. "You're setting a standard," he told Jessica. "Every talented person we hire brings in more talented people. We're creating a culture where merit truly matters." "That was always the plan," Jessica replied with a smile. Years later, when Matthew and Mark were teenagers, they asked their mother about those early, difficult days. "Mom, weren't you angry at that man who laughed at you?" Matthew asked. "At first, yes," Jessica admitted. "But then I realized anger wouldn't change anything. What changes things is action. Proving them wrong, not with words, but with results." "What if he hadn't changed his mind?" Mark wanted to know. "Then I would have found another place where my talent was valued. The secret isn't convincing others of our worth. The secret is never doubting ourselves." Thompson & Partners continued to grow, becoming one of the largest construction firms in the country. But more important than financial growth was the human growth the company represented. Jessica created a mentorship program where senior executives guided early career professionals, regardless of gender, marital status, or social background. The program became a model for other companies and was replicated internationally. Richard, now in his 60s, began thinking about succession. At a board meeting, he made an announcement that surprised everyone. "It's time for me to retire," he said, "and I already know who will take over as company president." All eyes turned to Jessica. "Jessica didn't just transform this company, she transformed me," Richard continued. "She showed that true leadership doesn't come from power or authority, but from competence, integrity, and the ability to lift others up." Jessica accepted the presidency, but insisted on keeping Richard as a senior advisor. "You taught me that everyone deserves second chances to grow," she said, "even those who make serious mistakes if they're truly willing to change." At the inauguration ceremony, Jessica spoke to an audience that included international clients, employees, family, and local officials. 10 years ago, I walked into this company carrying my 2 babies, desperate for work, humiliated by prejudice. Today, I take the helm of this very same company. But the real achievement isn't my position. The real achievement is the culture we've built together. She gestured to the crowd, where she saw faces of employees of different ages, backgrounds, and family situations. This company proves that when we give real opportunities to talented people, no matter how they come to us, everyone wins. Diversity isn't just the morally right thing to do, it's also the smartest thing for business. Richard, seated in the front row, applauded with tears in his eyes. Beside him, Matthew and Mark, now young adults with degrees in engineering and business, beamed with pride for their mother who had overcome every obstacle. In the years that followed, under Jessica's leadership, Thompson & Partners expanded to other countries, always carrying its values of inclusion and respect. The company became a case study in business schools worldwide. Jessica never forgot her roots. Every year on the company's anniversary, she shared her story with new employees, reminding everyone that talent can come from anywhere and in any form. The end of the story. And what did you think of this incredible journey of overcoming adversity? Have you ever been in a situation where you were judged by appearances? Share your experience in the comments and whether you believe Jessica made the right decisions. Don't forget to leave a like if the story touched your heart. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories of triumph.